People around the world work hard every day.
Choose a borrower.
Magpahiram.
Recibe su dinero.
Repeat.
So I wanted to open a little bit with a funny story about how three of us ended up being here. It's a bit of a longer story. And it was partially triggered by memory because next week we'll be honoring Jeff Weiner at the Full Circle Fund event. And that's actually how this part of this journey started for me. Normally when I'm giving talks at public places, one of the things that I tend to do is I tend to run from the event as fast as possible because I tend to get swarmed with people who have various forms of pitches for, I've got this a wearables idea that will essentially buzz on your wrist every hour so to make you remember to do exercise, and isn't that going to be the next iPhone? And you want to be friendly and you want to say, no, good luck, right? But no thanks, and run. And so after this Full Circle event 9 years ago, something like that,
9 years ago.
I'd given a speech for the organization because the organization's awesome. And I was running out the parking lot, and Premal comes running up to me, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to get pitched on something. He's like, I got this thing to talk to you about. I'm okay, Premal, yes. What is it? And he's like, it's called Kiva. And I'm like, wait, is that kiva.org? He's like, yes. Whatever you're going to ask me, the answer is yes, right? And I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to go now so other people don't pitch me on other things, but I've heard of Kiva, it's awesome. And I hadn't actually realized that Premal had joined forces with this kind of landmark effort of how do you bring microfinance in a really effective way throughout the world. Then, as it turned out later, the ask was join the board and help run this kind of merry crew. And part of the thing that when Premal and Matt and I were essentially trying to scheme about like what are the ways to really scale this, to make this work, it's like, well, we need additional, great entrepreneurial experience for folks who both have serious, deep operating, founder, entrepreneurship experience and whose souls are dedicated to a mission of changing the world. And I was like, Julie is kind of between things at the moment. She fits that bill. And so we went and, neon ground begged Julie to join us, and we're fortunate enough to bamboozle her into into this crew. And so with that opening, which is how we kind of a path how we all came together. I presume most of you are familiar with Kiva. It's very hard to follow a kind of emotional video like the one we just did, but that's part of what's awesome about this. Why don't we start with actually, Premal, a little bit about how you got involved 9-10 years ago, kind of what your path to it was.
Sure. I just want to say it's a real honor to be here with everyone, and Reid, it felt really good, especially in those early days, to hear someone who just unequivocally said yes so fast. And both Julie and Reid have just been incredible supporters of this public good, and it's a real treat to be here. to talk about it and talk about the future and some of the challenges we like to surmount to ensure that there's more opportunity for everyone. My own path really started as a result of my parents. My parents immigrated from India in the mid-70s, and I was raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a suburb. And when I was 5 years old, I had a chance to go back to India and visit some family. My grandparents lived out there, and it was an amazing trip. But of course, one thing that was so different than the suburbs of Minnesota was just the destitution, the poverty. And it's where, at the time, I didn't know the term birth lottery, where you're born has so much to do with the opportunity set that you have. But something felt wrong around, how do I have all of this, my brother, sister, and I, and had my parents stayed here, maybe it would have been a different outcome. And I remember it was something that really affected my heart. And several years later, as an econ major at Stanford, it was pretty dry in those classes, but there was a professor, and this is 1996, who tried to make kind of microeconomics come to life by talking about the concept of microfinance. He was talking about a man in Bangladesh named Muhammad Yunus, who 10 years later would go on to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And I loved it. I love this business approach to poverty alleviation, this kind of, as opposed to a top-down approach, a bottoms-up, market-driven approach that could create more space and opportunity in people who are born into difficult situations. So I fell in love with the idea and then joined Reid a few years later at PayPal. And that's where, for me, I think we're all bearing witness to this, just how transformational technology can be. Towards the end of my career at PayPal, at 6 years, I just started wondering, is there a way to essentially PayPal a microloan? And I wanted to actually do it back in India. And I went out there for a sabbatical, which was really awesome in PayPal to give me. And I think it's a retention program, but it's probably my first step out, actually. And you talk about that in Alliance, which is don't resist that. And honestly, that couple of months in India working in the slum, trying to prototype essentially what Kiva is today, it wasn't successful, but it was such a correct idea, which is poor people pay way too much for capital, especially from village moneylenders. I think people like us would be willing to lend it out to them. There's a way that we could connect one another and sustain the trust in that system. And so, luckily enough, I ran into Matt, who was building Kiva as a prototype, and soon after I quit my job at PayPal and have been a part of this ride.
As a matter of fact, I think when you approached me, I don't even think your name was on the website yet, because I'd looked at the website and I hadn't seen that you were was that fresh into the...
Yeah, in fact, I was actually trying to create, I didn't know it was a competitor, but I was trying to create my kind of a separate website. And I remember the first time I talked to the co-founder of Kiva, Matt Flannery, on the phone. He and I were both nervous about who was going to go first, talking about our ideas, because I guess we didn't want the other person to take the idea from each other. And it's really funny. I mean, if you think about all the goofy stuff that happens in the early days and then what really matters, it was amazing how, I mean, we live in we're so lucky now that we can, and LinkedIn's such a great manifestation of this, of giving people real identities and profiles that are public, and then with that, trust can come and opportunity can come.
And actually, maybe we should open with a similar question with you, Julie, which is, what were your first reflections? How did we, truthfully, we didn't have, given how great Kiva is, we didn't have to beg too hard to have you join ship, right? But what was your own kind of path to Kiva?
I find myself saying Kiva has many facets for me in terms of its meaning, and it is an idea that's simple and elegant in the way that people can quickly resonate with, and I certainly had that response to it. But on a deeper level, I would say that it is in many ways the perfect embodiment of my personal, professional, and philosophical lens on the world. And in many ways, Kiva has helped me crystallize that, because my my early beginnings. So I'm in a survivor of war, and I'm an Egyptian immigrant. And when I was 5 years old, I found myself, my family found ourselves living on the front lines of war, Black September in Jordan. Quite a brutal and bloody war for the region, and a lot of struggle and a lot of uncertainty. And I went from having a life experience where my family had kind of a dignified existence and fair access to everything that we needed in Egypt, to one where we lacked access to everything and had no certainty in our lives, no place, not knowing where we would sleep, not knowing where our next meal would come from. Being lucky enough to survive the war and immigrate to the States, and bringing a lot of hope with that, and then watching that all vanish again with not being able to gain access to the things we needed to provide for ourselves here in the States. And then fast forward, finding myself in Silicon Valley, where I had unfair access to everything. So for me, life has been about enabling fair access. And as a technologist, I viewed technology and all the companies and products that I built over the years as a way of democratizing access in one form or another, first through communications, connecting people, and with Kiva, democratizing access to capital. The things that really, I think Kiva touches on, that have probably through all those experiences that have most deeply shaped my values and beliefs, were that the most dramatic memory I have of those experiences have to do with three things. They're the look on people's faces that helped us when we struggled. There was a lot of kindness and generosity, but there was also another look in people's eyes that I didn't quite understand at the time as a child. An expression on my parents' faces when we were receiving the help that I didn't quite understand, and a feeling inside of me that I couldn't really understand at the time. And it's taken me the better part of a lifetime and my work through Kiva to really put words to it. And what I was seeing with the kindness and generosity in people's eyes was also a look of pity. And what I was seeing in my parents' face was that of seeing their dignity chipped away. And what I was feeling inside of me were deep feelings of shame that I didn't know how to explain to myself. And those things instilled in me a desire to create a more just world, with justice being defined in very specific ways. Justice being defined that how do you create a world where pity is replaced with compassion? How do we create a world that recognizes that fair access and dignity are inalienable human rights? How do we create a world that recognizes that talent is universal but opportunity isn't? How do we create a world that recognizes that technology is our most powerful tool for alleviating human suffering on a mass scale? How do we create a world that recognizes that entrepreneurship isn't just the domain of Silicon Valley, but that most of the planet are inherently kind of entrepreneurs in the way that they provide for themselves? So these are the things that have fueled me. And when I met Kiva, it was like the most concentrated, powerful embodiment of all those things. So I feel really humbled and grateful to be able to work with Kiva, and to be here with you, and to be on stage with two of my very favorite people on the planet. So thanks.
Likewise. So let's talk a little bit about technology and microfinance, and let's start about kind of how Kiva has begun with the kind of initial impact on this, kind of how we hope to change microfinance and the self-empowerment in terms of micro-entrepreneurs creating businesses, and then eventually get to Zip. But let's start with kind of the basic. And Premal, you want to talk about kind of like, here's our view of the microfinance industry, here's how we use technology to play into it.
Sure. So, you know, here's the world today. The world today, there's about 2.5 billion people who lack access to basic financial services. So, you know, we probably have a credit card in our wallet, we have a savings account, we have insurance that cover our needs. And to be poor, it's an incredibly complex situation at the household level, where without those financial tools, life is just even that much harder. And one of the challenges is scaling microfinance itself. since it was pioneered in the mid-70s, it's reached about 200 million households, low-income households, arguably the fastest growing intervention to help empower the poor in the history of interventions. And it's because it's market-based, and it has a lot of aspects that can fuel scale, but it hasn't grown fast enough. So I'd say problem number one is insufficient reach of microfinance today. Typically, a microfinance bank or a microfinance institution is like a small community credit union in your neighborhood. And if you imagine like the end of a dirt road kind of in a rural area, they'll have an outpost there. They'll have loan officers who get on mopeds or bicycles who go out to villages, and then typically the borrowers will be a group of people who are basically guaranteeing each other's loans. And that's the way of banking people, giving people loans where there's no credit score or there's no real kind of collateral, kind of the typical things that the formal system uses. That system, though, is expensive. So problem number two is I think the cost in microfinance of the 200 million people who are reached is really high. And I think technology can do two things. It can help fuel scale, and it can dramatically disrupt the cost structure of microfinance. And so, stage one for Kiva was working with microfinance organizations. We have nearly 300 of them in 80 countries that are posting up the photos of the people you see, the entrepreneurs on the Kiva website, and in administering your money. But that comes at a cost, and the interest rates, we believe, are still too high. It's better than the village money lender, who might be lending at 100 to 300%, but the average interest rate in microfinance is 35%. We think it can come down to sub 10% through technology. And so phase two is to actually go direct using things like mobile payment systems, crowdfunding, and trust networks. And that's what the Kiva Zip experiment is.
So let's go into Zip a little bit. There's kind of two different zones of experiences, right? There's the US and there's Kenya, and both have different lessons. Why don't we start, since we're kind of near San Francisco and there's some interesting stories around San Francisco and Kiva Zip, why don't we start with some of the learnings from the US Kiva Zip?
Sure. So Kiva Zip is a new website that we launched to see if we could do something a little differently, to go directly to the borrowers as opposed to through local NGOs on the ground. And the whole idea is that we could, again, expand access and lower cost. And back in 2008, when the financial crisis hit the United States, there was this thing called, the Great Credit Crunch, and particularly for small businesses, it's very hard to get a loan. And so people would write in every day into customer service at Kiva saying, how come you're not helping here in the United States? You're helping abroad, but we need help here too. And we looked into it, and it was pretty impressive just how underserved, impressive in a bad way, just how underserved micro enterprises are here. So a micro enterprise in the US is a small business with 5 employees or fewer. And 7 out of 10 of them that apply for a bank loan get rejected for a bank loan. So every day, 8,000 small businesses in the United States gets rejected from a bank loan. And small businesses create 2/3 of the jobs here in the United States. So we're wondering if people would want to crowdfund local small businesses, particularly ones that are oftentimes invisible in our economy. So here in San Francisco, just to illustrate how this works, there's a woman who, her name is Rocio, and she's a mother of 2, and she lives in South San Francisco, and she's a house cleaner. And she would literally bring a vacuum cleaner on the San Francisco Muni bus, and between dropping her kids off at school, cleaning homes, and then picking them up after work, she was missing client appointments. Super industrious woman, super positive, couldn't afford a car, didn't have a credit score that allowed her to get a car, didn't have established cash flows that would make a bank feel comfortable to just literally lend her $3,000 for a car. Now, I'm not beating up on the banks, it's just a systemic challenge of information asymmetry, you could say. Well, Rocio was able to get a loan because her friend, who opened up a coffee shop in San Francisco, another immigrant from Mexico, had repaid his first and second loan on Kiva, and then turned around and vouched for Rocio. And so similar to how you can endorse people on LinkedIn, right? And there's this network intelligence that's spreading. Essentially, we want to do that same system where there's information asymmetries for the world's most marginalized people, and give them a digital footprint similar to how eBay creates seller feedback rating systems. That's the type of system we're trying to create with Kiva Zip. And so Rocio was able to buy a car, clean more houses per day. Now she's taking out a bigger loan to basically start expanding her business, which is really great to see. Her children remain in school. And the great thing about Rocio is Rocio has paid it forward by vouching for Eva, who is her friend who sells at Bay Area flea markets. So, you know, we think that this kind of character-based system of people vouching for people, where there's real social capital within each other, can help fill the gap where there's not enough credit score or collateral or cash flow data to make banks feel comfortable.
Network of trust is clearly one of the things that LinkedIn folks are pretty cognizant of and supportive of. Let's do next the lessons from Kiva Zip Kenya. And then we'll come to the cross-scaling, the difficulties of scaling a nonprofit versus a for-profit and your contrast. But let's first do Kenya differences.
Sure. So here in the United States, Rocio would have gotten a loan via PayPal. And that's how we get the money directly to her. And it's done at 0% interest directly from you guys. In Kenya, there's a new system called M-Pesa. How many of you guys in the audience have heard of M-Pesa? This mobile money is one of the most exciting things, I think, on the planet, certainly in international development, because it takes out the friction and the cost of reaching people who right now have a hard time accessing financial services. So in Kenya today, people, 3/4 of adults actively use a service where I can, from my regular brick phone, send money to Reid. Reid can go to a local, say, merchant or a gas station owner, send his money stored value account to that gas station owner. The gas station owner will pull out Kenyan shillings from their cash register and give that money to Reid. So kind of instant ATM network in the most rural, marginalized places on the planet. Well, in Kenya. And if this room, by the way, we're the country of Kenya, everyone from here to here, so about 3/4 of you would be rural subsistence farmers. So it's really hard to reach you, and that's why the cost of reaching you is so high, which is why there's a vicious loop of not being able to get access. But with M-Pesa, which basically allows us to reach you directly in your hut, you don't even have to leave, and no kind of loan officer on a bicycle needs to moped out two hours away, all that stuff. It really has allowed us to reach people at a fraction of the cost. So we're running the same trust network pilot in Kenya, where people are vouching for people. So for example, we started with the churches in Kenya, and where pastors vouch for one member of their congregation. As that one member pays back, the pastor can vouch for 3 more, but then all 4 of those members, as they pay back, can vouch from other members. And it's essentially a trust graph that's spreading through Kenya, where we're providing loans, or you all, the internet community, are providing loans at a fraction of the cost today versus the brick and mortar alternative. So that's how the Kiva Zip process works in Kenya. And Julie got a chance to meet one particular borrower that I think really affected her.
You want to talk about that one first, then we'll go to the scaling org?
Yeah, I think, we were in Maragua, Kenya, which is literally hours down unpaved roads from Nairobi. And I think to call it a village would be a metropolis compared to this area. It was basically a hilltown settlement that doesn't have indoor plumbing, much less access to any form of indoor banking. And we met one of Kiva Zip's borrowers. His name was Erastus Kamani. And Erastus was a 72-year-old retired school teacher turned entrepreneur. And he had a clay stove liner business that makes basically cooking on open fires more efficient. And he only speaks Swahili, and he explained to me through an interpreter that he had figured out how to apply for, receive his loan, repay his loan twice, $1,700 worth of loans on what was probably a sub $5 phone. And when I saw Erastus and I heard his story, and his name, the name of his company is Rexel Industries, which is an acronym for his 6 daughters, and he spoke with great dignity and pride. Is such, Rexel Industries, first step Morago, Kenya, next step global world domination. But it really sparked in me kind of like connecting the dots between that and the fact that now there are, I think, 6.7 billion cell phones in the world today, right? And I think about 6 billion people have access to a mobile phone. I realized, gee, there's really nobody on the planet we shouldn't be able to reach. That technology's kind of far-reaching with mobile. You go to these remote areas and every place takes M-Pesa. And it looks far more advanced than the way that we do commerce with each other here in the US. So there's a sort of leapfrog effect that really has incredible potential. The trustee network effects, to see how that's working. We've always been obsessing, like all Silicon Valley organizations, around network effects and viral coefficients and viral mechanics. And the trustee model is showing this really powerful network effect for reaching kind of the riskiest and remotest parts of the world. So I find that really exciting.
Can I add one more thing about mobile payments and why it's so exciting? It's not just that it takes the friction out of the system to reach people like Erasmus at lower cost, but one borrower, she was saying that my husband may try to break into my phone, but he'll never get the money off my SIM card. And she was talking about how she had control over her money for the first time, as opposed to bringing it home, putting it somewhere, maybe saving it with a neighbor, and kind of losing some control over money. I feel like in terms of just security and agency and who in the household, 3 out of 4 loans on Kiva go to women-run businesses. Who gets to really control the money and where that's spent? I think mobile payments and being able to have kind of a one-to-one connection with the money you earn, I think that's very powerful for those on the margins.
So let's talk a little bit about the differences between trying to build a technology organization in San Francisco that is targeted on public good and mission. I mean, some tech organizations also try to do mission even though commercial, and kind of commercial entrepreneurship. So, having played on both sides of that canyon, any kind of top lessons? And we'll ask Premal the same question, having done the same thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting and important question that I think about daily, and we talk about almost daily. I first began working with Kiva's the first and only nonprofit that I've worked with actively, and I first kind of came to it with the mindset of viewing the commonalities between the two, because I looked at all the companies I'd built and helped build, and they were all mission driven, and so it was like, okay, this is just kind of a structural a secondary consideration, not a primary one. If you're a mission-driven organization, the fact that you're a for-profit or nonprofit is really secondary. Really, what the common questions to ask between both are, how do we resource ourselves? How do we capitalize the organization? How do we reach sustainability so we can have control over our destiny? How do we reach scale? How do we attract the world's best talent? So when you ask those questions in a nonprofit construct, there are some interesting things that emerge that are some differences, but let me start with the commonalities. So I think if you're a mission-driven organization and you have a new structure as a nonprofit, there is a goodwill, if you will, from the community, and you attract really mission-aligned employees and people who are deeply committed to the mission, very passionate about it, and a community around that. Kiva benefits and has greatly from having a massive global community. I don't know what the last count is. I think it's north of 400 now, but like our translator community, for example, translates far more, I think by an ordinary magnitude, than Translators Without Borders do, for example, 400 people around the world. So we have this incredible community, and they really hold us, you also are held accountable to them. You have to earn that commitment and trust from them. They keep you in integrity with yourself, and there's something really healthy and important about that. The differences, I would say, come into what are the sources of capital. So if you're a Silicon Valley tech company, it's VC. If you're a nonprofit, it's mostly foundations, grants, and And then you have kind of new generation hybrid models like Omidyar Network, who think like venture capitalists but are also sort of invest in nonprofit organizations. When you think about how you incentivize and compensate employees, you don't have equity. So what are the incentives and motivators for folks to come? Certainly mission is sort of first front and center. The sustainability question is, what's our revenue model? So I often refer to Kiva as a for-revenue organization, or not-for-profit as opposed to non-profit, because I think Kiva was one of the first organizations that really pioneered a sustainability model. We call it a tip. When you make a loan, you can have the option to tip Kiva, and that's the revenue model. There, and there are a couple of others that we've explored as well. The big question, I say, comes in that the way that you can capitalize yourself for growth becomes a challenge. The venture communities used to placing large bets around achieving mass scale so that you can really kind of be bold and aggressive and risk-taking around that. The nonprofit world tends to fund less so in those ways. They tend to give you smaller amounts of money, and you're constantly sort of fundraising from them. And that divides the energy of an organization. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest challenges in terms of the nonprofit for-profit divide, but I'd say more common than difference.
Premal?
You know, our belief is that the role of nonprofits, one of the most effective kind of ways that we can play, and this is something that's shared by the Gates Foundation as well, is to start where the markets end, where the markets fail, right, and to kind of push the edges of the markets more so it can serve everyone and it can truly be inclusive. And so, for example, you know, in 2007, when we entered Iraq to support Iraqi entrepreneurs, no investor at the time was saying, geez, you know, like, we really want to expand into Iraq, or that wasn't a real common thing on Wall Street. But what we found is that the internet community was really interested in going to the places that were most in need, that had, in the case of Iraq, high country risk, and therefore, you know, the entrepreneurs are going to need a little more patient capital. And so I think what's been an advantage about the nonprofit structure is that it's allowed us to say, look, we can be more patient in the sustainability model of this. We can go to places where we might not be able to get to cost recovery. There's more information asymmetries. It's harder to work in Iraq. It's harder to, for example, Kiva right now funds within more post-conflict African countries as in terms of microfinance institutions reach than any other funder worldwide. And it's really the internet community doing that. We can go into places where commercial investors still are afraid, and ideally show that there are real entrepreneurs here that can repay loans. They may start at a concessionary, patient kind of term, but over time, what we'd love to do is prove to the capital markets, to Main Street investors, that there's really good business to be done in these countries, and that's how I think we can build sustainable institutions and get to lasting peace on some of the, you know, kind of most war-torn, conflict-ridden places. So I would say it's allowed us to do things that are unconventional, if you will. And then what we need to do, and Reid really pioneered this in the boardroom, he said, look, the way to think about your impact, and this is a frame that we've really, really adopted, is think of breadth times depth times sustainability or duration. And the breadth is kind of the total loans that you reach, or total loans that are made, total number of people reached. But the depth is, where is that money going? Is it truly going to the hardest to reach places? And places like Iraq or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, those are some of the places that we're most proud to serve. And then that sustainability or duration piece, that's something that we're all constantly thinking about. And Julie's point, it has been challenging as a nonprofit, as a 501c3, to get those big, you know, a Series A, Series B, Series C, big tranches of capital to you know, achieve that impact at scale. But, you know, we're also trying to change the conversation there around really leverage. And so for every $1 we spend running Kiva, we're raising about $10 from the internet community in patient loans that help create sustainable change. And we think that funders are really excited about leverage over anything, and we'd like to get that message out.
Are there any particular stories or lessons from the conflict areas, the difficult areas, that are kind of shareable in short, simple form? There's obviously deep ones that would take an hour themselves.
Well, you know, one of the really beautiful things about the internet community is the premise of Kiva is that when you can establish a connection between people, there's a real empathy. And then when there's empathy, there's a generosity. And in the places that we work, conflicts and bad things can happen. And what we've seen is, for example, we have a portfolio in the Ukraine. We work in West Africa right now. I'll just take something that's very timely. We work in Liberia and Sierra Leone. In fact, I was there about 18 months ago, visiting our partners. And right now, because the way people are handling cash, it's real cash. There's a fear amongst the borrowers that you see on Kiva in Sierra Leone and in Liberia that money transmits Ebola. So our local partners on the ground have had to basically shut down operations. Everything's frozen. Now, unlike a commercial investor that has covenants and so on and so forth, and you're now in default, the internet community that actually can understand why the repayments aren't coming back, the overwhelming response from Kiva lenders is, that's fine, let's just reschedule the loans. Let's write it off. There's a patience, there's an empathy there, a generosity that I think when you can create these real connections is really powerful. So what we'd love to do is essentially start experimenting with wherever there are kind of the biggest risk terms, how can we create really long-term loans that still look for a market-based approach, but maybe you get paid back over 10 years. No normal investor would want to do that, but we think the internet community, by establishing that connection well, and we hope that we can support places like Sierra Leone and Liberia as they get back on track and obviously get a handle on things right now, but ideally go back to a market-based economy that was starting to emerge when I was there.
Let's shift a little bit to one of the other things that Kiva has pioneered is how to integrate with, have programs that work for corporations like HP and so forth. Julie, you want to start a little bit with that and then give Premal a chance to drink a bit of water?
Yeah, actually, so you were the first pioneer in that with semi-corporate. We began sort of talking about the genesis of this was that really, if you think about what Kiva had done, sort of managed to mobilize small amounts of money, kind of peer-to-peer lending, $25 at a time, and had managed to do that at scale where the repayment rate was holding at 99%. I said, gee, this is, markets were volatile in 2008. People were losing money in the market, and Kiva's repayment rate was holding at 99%. And so we kind of said, well, gee, couldn't this be a way to put large amounts of money to work? And particularly the relending rate is also very high. So you put $100 in, and you get it paid back, and you relend it over and over again. 100,000 has the effect of 1,000 over time. 1,000 has the effect of 10,000 over time, et cetera. And a term that Reid coined that I really love, sort of, it's like philanthropy exponentialized. Just had this sort of renewable effect. How can we do this at even higher scale? If people can do it $25 a time, what if someone wanted to put $500,000, $1 million to work? And so the first guinea pig that we managed to rope into doing that was Reid with $1 million.
I don't know what sounds guinea pigs make, but whatever that sound is.
Very willingly let us rope him into that, $1 million loan fund. And kind of said, how many people could he reach with $1 million? And then how could we use $1 million to get other lenders into the system lending Reid's money? And what we saw was that we could reach 40,000 borrowers, and we could engage 40,000 new lenders with the $1 million in Reid's loan fund. And then we could do that one cycle. When he got repaid, he could withdraw it, or he could keep relending. And that became kind of the gateway to kind of saying, how can we do this with corporations and employee engagement? Could that be a way of driving employee engagement? Corporations are looking to do things around social responsibility, meaning purpose, engaging employees around that. What if a company did a loan fund? And so Premal and his team have done a fantastic job in really pioneering that with Google and with HP. Most recently, HP did an $8 million loan fund, and within a matter, I think, of weeks or months, half the employees had loaned part of that loan fund and became lenders on Kiva. Google did a $1 million fund initially. So we're very excited by this because it has a sort of triple impact, both at the corporate level, employee engagement, a sense of pride and meaning and purpose, and it's higher leverage ways of bringing mass amounts of money into the system. So,
yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we were sitting, I remember this, we were sitting in a board meeting, and, you know, Kiva's a service that allows you to try to create sustainable change in someone else's life, and 98% of the time, you get your money back. So you would think that, like, everyone would be doing this. And, you know, Reid sitting on different boards, being at LinkedIn, you guys have grown so fast. We've only grown to 1 million people, which is a lot in a nonprofit context, but it's certainly insufficient if you consider the massive need out there. And so, you know, this idea of a freemium model, which is let's give people a free trial. You know, take $1 million, cut it up into 40,000 $25 chunks, put it up on Twitter, and say, hey, lend out Reid's money for free, give Kiva a try for free, help someone for free.
Driver referral program.
Yeah, and it was amazing. Those 40,000 people who signed up in March of 2012, usually only 10,000 people a month sign up for Kiva. That month, 50,000 people signed up. Those 40,000 people, over the next 14 months, put in $1.2 million of their own money because they tried it. And then Reid, you got paid back $994,000, which you've just been recycling. Well, you know, as Julie mentioned, when Google heard about this, they said, all right, all 35,000 employees get $75 for free. So you get free lunches at Google, and you know, and you know, you can help someone for free, and you know, other companies have followed. So I think one of the things that's happening in corporate philanthropy is, you know, there's usually, you know, a company makes money, they give it to some foundation that is a company foundation, then they go donate it somewhere, they write an article on the intranet, and most employees aren't even aware of what's happening. And so what we'd posit is let your employees spend your money. And that happens in matching programs. We think that this is incredibly leveraged because once you seed an employee, they tend to put in more and more money themselves and create more sustainable impact over time.
Now I have a bunch more questions, but we're going to take questions from you guys too. So if you can line up at the mic, I'll start with a question, and if people don't line up, I'll just keep asking questions. But if you have them, please line up at the mic. So how do we measure, I mean, I obviously know the answer to this question, but this is for you guys to say, how do we measure our impact? How do we get a sense of what we're doing for the micro entrepreneurs? How do we get a sense of what we're doing for the lenders? What's the kind of ways that Kiva looks at that?
Yeah, I think our impact is twofold, like you mentioned, Reid. One is on the entrepreneurs, and the ultimate data point that we'd love to get to is what is the delta in income, kind of pre and post loan, right? Because typically what that entrepreneur is buying is some type of productive asset, a cow, goats, and with that they're able to, you know, raise their income and then ideally pay back your loan. On the lender side, it's a little more nebulous, but there's something around, you know, creating a world that's more compassionate, where there's more empathy. I think one thing that social scientists talk about when it comes to helping is that there's something called compassion collapse, which is the problems on the world like climate or poverty are so big, it's denominated in billions and trillions, that the mind doesn't actually know where to help, and it just kind of tunes out and starts watching the Kardashians. What we want to do is human scale.
my brain just fried. Right. Let's keep going.
But you know, I think it's so hard to know what you can actually do, and you know what we're trying to do is kind of create a frame where you don't have to change the world, you just have to change it for one person, and to human scale it, and to reduce this kind of compassion collapse and allow people to get feedback loops as they get repaid, and then maybe they actually think about, what is happening in Sierra Leone? What else can I do? How else could I vote? Like, how could I change and be a more kind of a better global citizen? That's something that we're really particularly excited about, particularly with young people, and weaving Kiva into classrooms as an educational lesson. So Where we'd love to go is start getting data on the delta and income for the entrepreneurs, and that's going to be made more possible through mobile payment systems and kind of mobile phone. And then on the lender side, some kind of change in consciousness and empathy, which we haven't figured out exactly how to measure, but we're starting with trying to work with educators and parents and incorporating it for young people.
Great.
Hi.
Hi.
I've been a Kiva lender for, I think, 6 or 7 years now, and I love the service.
Thank you.
And I also had the opportunity to spend 2 years in and around the slums of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And every time I make a loan on Kiva, I go and check if there are any loans in Brazil. And I'm sure other people have the same feeling for whatever country that they care a lot about. So Kiva Zip is exciting for me. I hope that that makes Brazil a possibility. But I'm wondering if you can speak to Brazil specifically, but all of the other nations that you haven't reached yet.
The most common, one of the 5 most common customer service questions we get is, why aren't you in country X, Y, or Z? And we have historically had a challenge working in the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, because of central bank issues, currency control issues. We recently partnered with an organization in Brazil, but they're very small. So the number of loans that they post per year is so small that they get snapped up on the website very quickly. What you could say is that sends a market signal to us, to Kiva, to go and find more organizations in Brazil now that we've got one. And this is where it goes back to the capacity challenge of a nonprofit, which is if we were able to expand our budget, I mean, the need is there around the planet. We would love to more aggressively expand where the internet community wants to fund. In Brazil, India, I mean, some of these places, we keep running out of loans on the website. So it's a real challenge for us. The best thing to do is keep writing in and let us know about that so that we can then point our efforts towards places where the internet community wants to fund that maps to where we think there's the highest need.
Well, and in particular, it's either if you know of organizations we could partner with that would help scale.
Absolutely.
And in the part for the Zip stuff, we're in the process of trying to figure out how the network of trust works, and so that we can begin to scale that in all these different countries. But we're essentially driving that intensively U.S. Kenya to try to get the lessons across those two things. But finance projects are the kinds of ones you can lose tons of money at if you get wrong, right? So you have to build it up systemically.
Gerard van der Star from the Netherlands, Rotterdam University. I was just wondering why LinkedIn shouldn't have a button with Kiva.
That's a great idea.
Website. I love it. I mean, you're looking for corporations. You might be looking for linked persons to push the Kiva button.
Well, just to credit LinkedIn for a second, I mean, one, you guys already provide us highly discounted recruiting services, or kind of, talent is everything. Honestly, your programs that allow nonprofits to get those discounts, it makes a huge difference. Because yes, we can raise donations, but we turn around and spend it on people. Trying to get great engineers, for example, is really hard. Your tool makes it so much simpler for us and more efficient. 2, you have a LinkedIn for Good program. I just want to call it out. That helped fund our Kenya Kiva Zip project, so thank you for that. But yes, your mission or your vision is to expand economic opportunity. That's very consistent with what we're trying to do. We're starting at kind of different ends of the spectrum on the planet, but you can imagine the network intelligence of people who have X number of endorsements in Sierra Leone, right? Why can't there be, if they're a small business owner, if they need capital, which so many people do to expand economic opportunity, why can't we take kind of the back end of Kiva and have that be exposed through a LinkedIn type functionality? I mean, I'm sure there are good reasons why that can't happen today, but that's the type of convergence that would be fantastic to think about. That's more than a when than an if. Yeah. On that particular one, you can in your own profile. I mean, I have my primary thing. Even though there's a number of nonprofits that I serve on the board of and help, the one that's most elaborated is Kiva, as a way of trying to drive attention to that, so when people come to my profile. And so people have that sort of control. The specific needing to have a button, you actually need to go and shop at the marketplace and all the rest. So it's principally referring people over to kiva.org, but all ideas very welcome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jagan Bamiripati, and I'm from India. Hi. A question for you is, good health often leads to good wealth. And one of the common things that I see when I go to India, and I was unfortunate enough to visit a hospital when I was in India, is the level of poverty that prevents people from getting routine medical care and health care just because they can't afford the money. And $25 would seem like it goes a long way in a country like India to get people set up for their immediate healthcare needs. Is there a way for Kiva to step into that gap where hospitals can petition, they have these people waiting in the queue who need an MRI, and an MRI in India is $100, right? 4 people coming in can give an MRI to a person in India. Is there a way for Kiva to leverage your infrastructure to help donors from more affluent countries help the poorer people and indigent ones at getting the healthcare they need at a fraction of the cost it would be when they actually fall sick?
There's one website you all should know about, which I'm a huge fan of. It's a Kiva for healthcare for life-changing surgeries and frontline health. It's called WOTC.org. There you can directly fund a patient who is in need of some type of life-enhancing or life-saving intervention, and you should definitely check that out. We just partnered at Kiva, for example, with Partners in Health. If anyone's heard of that, Dr. Paul Farmer's organization. That
awesome organization, by the way.
It's an amazing organization that is really trying to provide high-quality health care for people in poor communities. And what we found in this partnership is that this hospital is actually doing a small loan program because they feel that patient compliance, and particularly with TB, goes up when they actually have hope and something to live for and money. And so the hospital, they're running a small pilot where they're the ones who are administering the loans that you can make on Kiva, and you could look for something like that. The problems of health, though, and education, historically have been the realm of pure donations, not loans, except until recently where there's been a lot of, I'd say, social entrepreneurs trying to create new systems that are more efficient, and we're starting to look at that at Kiva too. So, basically for-profit health clinics on the front line that charge a small fee to patients. Can we help finance that to spread access to health faster?
Thank you.
Oh, hello. My name is Dan. I want to thank you for coming today because I'm a software engineer right now, but when I was in college, I actually did a 2-month microfinance internship in Mombasa, Kenya, and I was able to see a lot of the work you guys do in action. I was able to see M-Pesa and all that good stuff. So my question is, so as LinkedIn is a technology company, there's a lot of people with mobile software development skills. And so I wanted to ask how we can be best leveraging those skills to contribute to the future of mobile payments for microfinance.
Well, for example, we have APIs that are public. And, one of the things that we'd really appreciate is if people would take that and create a great tablet app. We're so far behind when I look at what we could do to engage more people and make it more simple for people just relend their credit. There's about $40 million sitting in people's Kiva accounts that could be in the hands of the working poor, and I don't think we made it convenient enough to relend. So if you are a developer, you could go check out build.kiva.org and build something that could help enable more good pretty simply. And we're just trying to get the word out about that. There's a ton of applications that don't yet exist. In terms of Reid and Julie, you guys think about this, which is there's a broader problem of attracting the world's best technical talent to the social sector, to things that could really benefit. How do you guys think about that?
Well, this is one of the things we didn't quite do in the differences, which is social sector, particularly in Silicon Valley, where costs are so high, the capital part of it is difficult, given the personal cost of making a choice is very high for people. And it's still amazing we got the great talent that we do, given that scenario. So I think it's kind of, one of the things that, Mozilla, 8-9 years ago, is frequently it's a tour of duty through the organization. It's like, look, I'll go do this for 2, 3 years, 4 years, do something real, and then go make money. And the commercial side tends to be the typical relationship in that. But I don't know if there's anything you would want to add.
Well, the thing that, yes, and the thing that I also think about is one of the advantages of being in the Silicon Valley is the cross-pollination of knowledge and kind of the network effects around that. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to Premal and the team about is how do we create that advantage? We're here in Silicon Valley where if there are developers that are motivated, technical talent, all kinds of talent, because Silicon Valley is just a giant petri dish where the way we share knowledge accelerates everybody's progress. How can Kiva more actively participate in that ecosystem? So I would say, and mobile is an area where we do feel like we've got some distance to travel. So if helping our own thinking, contributing time, energy, knowledge, experience around how to think about mobile first sort of way of reinventing the Kiva experience, whether it's solving very specific problem like relending or something more broadly, I think is something we would be super grateful and welcome for, because I think keeping that mechanism of cross-pollination and getting that going would be really, really powerful for us.
Okay, thank you.
And what's your name again, just so we can know where to track you down?
Dan Dang, D-A-N-D-E-N-G. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, this feels shameless, but we're doing for the larger social good. We are recruiting right now, and I thought it was not the purpose of this, but it's fine. So please, huge potential right now if you know how to create something to really change the game for a lot of people.
Hi, I'm Brian Drummond. I work at LinkedIn here in technical program management. And fantastic stories. It's really very motivational. I feel like going out and joining Kiva's cause more than just a token participation. So thank you for that. Great stories. So my question is that this is a very game-changing proposition and can be very disruptive. And so the question is, you mentioned down at the village level, I guess there are these village lenders who already have a system in place getting 200 or 300% return on what they do. You're coming in and you're a disruption to them. So what are the strategies and tactics they're using to get to that last mile, or I guess the last few feet to get around that? How are you working with that?
You know, what's so great is that when you come in with an offering, at first when Kiva launched, the idea that if you posted your photo and story on the internet that money would come was preposterous. I mean, here in California and in the United States, we were, at that time maybe just shifting from Friendster to MySpace, and it was more, you could imagine it. But in the places that we were trying to work, it was seen as a scam or unbelievable. Now, as Kiva is about 9 years old, and there's, real money going through the system. For example, going back to Kenya, people are telling people, and word is spreading like very fast, that you can actually get a better deal by sharing your story online. And it's all sustained by trust, meaning that if someone in your network doesn't repay, then future people in that network aren't able to get that access. So, that simple word is spreading. I don't know what that means for the village money lender and how they adapt or cope with it. Maybe they bring down their prices to stay competitive. It's still very early, but it's a correct idea and it's spreading very quickly. Word of mouth style.
I think we're a few minutes over, so join me in thanking our guests. Thank you for the awesome work.
Thank you.
I think for many of us, including you guys, it's back to work.
Thanks.